In this video, I'm going to examine 50 important aspects of the Lucy Letby case, which point to this being one of the most egregious, shambolic and painful miscarriages of justice in not just British, but world history. Number 1. Lucy's flawless background. Everyone agrees that Lucy Letby does not meet the profile of a serial killer. Lucy's friend, Dawn Howe, revealed that Lucy had decided upon her career path of becoming a nurse from a very early age due to Lucy herself having been saved by nurses shortly after her birth. Cheshire Police made an enormous effort to excavate every area of Lucy Letby's life and yet discovered no dirt on her whatsoever. Everything indicates that Lucy Letby was a dedicated and hard-working neonatal nurse with absolutely no darkness or macabre interests. Number 2. No one saw Lucy do anything wrong. It is universally agreed that no one saw Lucy Letby do anything untoward on the neonatal unit. Even the small minority of people that retain a belief in guilt completely concede this point. Number 3. Supportive statements from Lucy's colleagues. During the trial of Lucy Letby, it was claimed that the neonatal unit was blinking red and that the colleagues of Lucy Letby had serious concerns. In actual fact, when the Thirlwell inquiry published approximately 20 statements from nurses who worked closely with Lucy Letby, none of them had any suspicions or concerns about her whatsoever. Several nurses, in fact, expressed their belief that Lucy Letby is innocent. Number 4. Important reviews of the hospital. Previous reviews conducted by the Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health and the Care Quality Commission had revealed a litany of problems at the hospital. Further documents acquired and published by the Thirlwell inquiry have given us an even more acute insight into major problems at the Countess of Chester Hospital, where Lucy Letby worked. Number 5. Sewage and sepsis on the unit. Among these major issues is the presence of raw sewage on the unit. This is naturally extremely troubling for any workplace, let alone a hospital unit dealing with vulnerable infants. There is a known link between sewage and sepsis, and it is therefore perhaps not surprising that 9 infants of those included in the indictment against Lucy Letby were known to be septic. Number 6. Pseudomonas and Stenotrophomonas multifilia infection. There is also evidence of Pseudomonas aeruginosa infection on the unit, and this was known about at the time based on a pro forma completed by the Care Quality Commission. Pseudomonas aeruginosa is considered by the World Health Organization to be one of the most dangerous pathogens and is potentially deadly for young infants. There is also evidence of Stenotrophomonas multifilia on the unit, while other infections have also been documented by experts. These all provide a plausible pretext for the collapse and even death of infants on the unit. Number 7. Cramped, overstretched neonatal unit. The neonatal unit at the Countess of Chester was known to be cramped and frankly inadequate. Even the hospital has tacitly accepted this by moving the neonatal section to an entirely new unit and demolishing the old cramped facility. Naturally, the cramped nature of the unit makes infants far more vulnerable to infection. It was also known that the unit was overstretched in terms of cot facilities, with more babies being treated on the unit than should have been the case. The paediatric lead at the hospital, Dr. Stephen Breary, conceded that the neonatal unit never met British Association of Perinatal Medicine standards in this regard. Number 8. Understaffed and underskilled. Similarly, the Countess of Chester neonatal unit was understaffed and underskilled at this time, relying on an inexperienced workforce and even on part-time agency nurses. Lucy Letby was afforded a position of relative seniority despite the fact that she had just qualified for nursing and was fresh out of university. The Countess of Chester had also made numerous experienced members of staff redundant. This is important because nurses are the eyes and ears of the unit. This problem was further compounded by consultants only doing 2 ward rounds per week, which has left virtually every healthcare professional that I've spoken to completely aghast. This is deeply inappropriate, especially on a unit in which monitoring is so important. Number 9. Challenging acuity of infants. The infants treated on the unit during the period of Lucy Letby's indictment certainly represented a challenging acuity. There were numerous problematic low birth weight premature infants, and when a number of twins and triplets are factored into the equation, this would have been challenging even for a particularly competent tertiary unit. This certainly didn't apply to the Countess of Chester, which was a Level 2 unit downgraded to Level 1 in 2016 and which has yet to be upgraded back to Level 2. The reality is that many of these infants should have been born at other hospitals and should never have been treated at the Countess of Chester. Number 10. Litany of medical errors. There were a litany of medical errors on the unit, including problems with numerous basic procedures. An expert panel of credentialed neonatologists cited numerous major blunders at the Countess of Chester, which likely contributed to collapses and deaths of infants. Number 11. Consultants rapidly accused Lucy and waged a 2-year campaign against her. Despite these very evident problems, consultants working on the neonatal unit at the Countess of Chester rapidly pointed the finger of accusation at Lucy Letby and then waged a 2-year campaign against her until the case was eventually referred to the police on the 2nd of May 2017. Concerns about Lucy Letby emanated from Dr. Stephen Breary as early as June 2015, and yet Dr. Breary was, at the very least, reluctant to contact the police himself. Number 12. Lucy's grievance procedure. Having been removed from her clinical duties amid accusations of deliberate harm, Lucy Letby launched a grievance procedure against the hospital in 2016. It is also notable that the hospital was less than transparent with Lucy regarding the reasons for her removal. Despite the fact that it is incredibly unusual for a nurse to take out a grievance procedure against senior consultants, Lucy was successful in her grievance, with every single point raised being upheld by an independent panel. Number 13. Passed to the police with no evidence. On the 2nd of May 2017, executives from the Countess of Chester Hospital wrote to the Cheshire Police Constabulary requesting them to exclude unnatural causes. On the 5th of May 2017, internal documents from Cheshire Police indicate that the constabulary acknowledged that there was no evidence to support any malfeasance from Lucy Letby other than coincidence. This statistical coincidence would later form a critical and flawed element of the trial. Number 14. Rapidly evolved into major investigation. Despite the fact that the case was passed to Cheshire Police with no evidence by their own admission, the constabulary rapidly began a major investigation. This is despite the fact that initially they had no intention of investigating, according to their own words. But after Dr. Stephen Breary, Dr. Ravi Jairam and Dr. Susie Holt held a meeting with Cheshire Police on the 15th of May 2017, during which they clearly identified Lucy Letby as being a suspect, Cheshire Police performed a 180-degree turn, and within a matter of 3 days, the investigation had been reported to major newspapers, including The Guardian. This was despite the fact that just days previously, Cheshire Police agreed with executives from the hospital that there was no evidence of malfeasance and they had no intention of investigating. Number 15. Lucy gave honest answers to Cheshire Police. Lucy Letby was questioned by Cheshire Police for over 23 hours, during which, even by the account of Cheshire Police, she was always cooperative. She gave answers to every question that has been seen in the transcripts that are available at this point in time, and certainly attempted to be as helpful as possible. It is also notable that she never said anything dismissive or critical regarding her colleagues on the unit. Lucy was plainly honest and cooperative throughout police interviews and certainly did not have the demeanour of a guilty person. Number 16. Cheshire Police completely ignored all exonerating information provided by Lucy. Despite the honesty of her interviews, Cheshire Police completely ignored all exonerating and constructive information that was provided by Lucy Letby during her interviews. This is despite the fact that they also claimed in their own promotional film that the reason they arrested Lucy Letby for the first time was because they wanted to gather information and she was the person who knew the most about the case. Number 17. Cheshire Police expected Lucy Letby to explain everything that happened on the unit. One of the expectations that Cheshire Police had of Lucy Letby, based on what we've seen of their interviewing process, was that Lucy would be required to give explanations for absolutely everything that occurred on the unit. This is completely preposterous and impossible, even for a qualified neonatologist with all of the medical notes, neither of which applied to Lucy. This aspect of the police investigation was then passed directly into the court case, where prosecutors used similar arguments to those initially made by the police. Number 18. Cheshire Police involved her accusers in the investigation. Having allowed Dr. Stephen Breary and Dr. Ravi Jairam to play a central role in changing their mind regarding the investigation, Cheshire Police then involved the accusers of Lucy Letby in the investigation, in a move that can only be described as staggering. Breary and Jairam selected cases for Cheshire Police and were so instrumental in the investigation that Dr. Breary even discovered the insulin cases that were critical in the indictment. The consultants would later be described by Paul Hughes, who led the investigation for Cheshire Police, as the golden thread in the investigation. There is no evidence that Cheshire Police ever made any effort to investigate anything regarding the background of Breary and Jairam, anything related to Lucy's grievance procedure, any of the context related to events at the hospital, or anything else of any relevance. Number 19. The background of the primary witness. Dr. Dewi Evans played an instrumental role in the conviction of Lucy Letby, and yet he was not only not a neonatologist, but had been retired from clinical work for approximately 15 years at the time of the court case. In fact, when working for Cheshire Police, Dr. Evans wasn't even a registered doctor, according to his GMC registration. Number 20. Expert hand-waved other experts. We now know that Dr. Evans, who was not an adequate expert in the first place, hand-waved involvement from any other experts. The National Crime Agency has suggested several experts who should have been involved in the police investigation, but Dr. Evans decided that he didn't want anyone else to be involved other than himself. It is also likely, based on leaked documents, that he was involved in the hand-picking of other experts who later approved his conclusions, although at the time of Lucy Letby's first arrest, the only medical expert who had examined the cases was Dr. Dewi Evans himself. Number 21. Evans' evidence described as worthless. The evidence provided by primary prosecution witness Dr. Dewi Evans in a previous trial was described as worthless by the presiding judge in that trial, Lord Justice Jackson. Indeed, Lord Justice Jackson wrote to the Letby trial judge, Judge James Goss, in order to express his concerns. Lord Justice Jackson described the report provided by Evans as worthless, indicating that the witness made no effort to provide a balanced opinion. Jackson continued that Evans either knows what his professional colleagues have concluded and disregards it, or he has not taken steps to inform himself of their views. Either approach amounts to a breach of proper professional conduct. No attempt has been made to engage with the full range of medical information or the powerful contradictory indicators. Instead, the report has the hallmarks of an exercise in working out an explanation that exculpates the applicants. It ends with tendentious and partisan expressions of opinion that are outside of Dr. Evans' professional's competence and have no place in a reputable expert report. For all those reasons, no court would have accepted a report of this quality, even if it had been produced at the time of the trial. For some bizarre reason, Judge James Goss refused to throw Dr. Evans out of this court case and instead ruled that the jury could decide whether or not Evans was a legitimate expert. Since this information emerged, several other cases have been revealed in which Dr. Evans engages in the same pattern of behaviour, particularly the comment made by Lord Justice Jackson of the hallmarks of an exercise in working out an explanation that is required by the side in court that Dr. Evans is serving. Indeed, this pattern is evident both in the evidence provided in the Lucy Letby trial and also in new leaked documents from Operation Hummingbird, in which Dr. Evans is providing his opinion to Cheshire Police. It has become extremely clear that Dr. Evans is an unreliable witness, and even weeks ago another case emerged in which he had spoken outside of his professional expertise in a case involving shaken baby syndrome. Number 22. Evans wrote reports after knowing Lucy's name. Dr. Evans also wrote at least 25 reports after he knew the name of Lucy Letby, changing critical details of his medical evidence. This is important because Dr. Evans firstly has repeatedly claimed that he never knew the name of Lucy Letby when he began writing his reports. This may be true, although it may very well not be true, but several of his final conclusions were indeed submitted after he definitely knew the name of Lucy Letby. Secondly, it is believed by statistical experts that the shift chart, which shows Lucy Letby is responsible for all collapses on the unit related to the indictment, is impossible to produce without working backwards. It appears very strongly that Dr. Evans has fitted his evidence around the defendant, not least because there are several previous examples in which he has done exactly this in other court cases. It should finally be mentioned that Dr. Evans significantly changed his opinion on child C in court when Lucy Letby was literally staring back at him. Number 23. Lucy was broken going into the court case. It has been well established, and was indeed reported at the time, that Lucy Letby was in a broken state when the trial began after she was forced to move prisons and lost virtually all of her personal possessions. Indeed, the trial had to be delayed because Lucy was in no state to participate. Ben Myers, Lucy's barrister at the time, described Lucy being in a dreadful state and explained that on Friday afternoon in the preceding week, she had been moved from where she had been present in Bronzefield for some time to Her Majesty's Prison, New Hall in Wakefield, approximately 45 miles from the courtroom, without any of her possessions, without even a brush or toiletries or clothing, without any of the support regime that she has been provided with, and had consequently been left in an utterly disoriented state. This was so bad that Lucy, a clearly intelligent woman, was incoherent, unable to speak properly, and according to Ben Myers, could not think clearly at all. As an indication of some of the embarrassing media commentary of Cheshire Police, it should be noted that the lead of the Operation Hummingbird investigation into the Countess of Chester, Paul Hughes, claimed publicly that Lucy had enjoyed the trial. Number 24. The lambasted and ridiculed shift chart. A central component of the prosecution case was a shift chart which communicated the view that Lucy Letby was always on shift when infants collapsed. However, this chart has been utterly discredited by statisticians, several of whom have already appeared on my channel, with more to follow in the future. It is clear that this statistical chart has no scientific or evidential value whatsoever, and it is already known that Lucy wasn't even on duty for numerous collapses. Furthermore, there are instances where she was on duty in which it is not disputed by anyone that there were numerous other members of staff around her, and that any malicious attacks on infants would have been impossible. Number 25. Cheshire Police cancelled the work of Professor Jane Hutton. The problems with the shift chart, and a key pillar of the prosecution case, could have been discovered by Cheshire Police had they commissioned the work of Professor Jane Hutton, who they contacted and who has been previously interviewed by myself. However, the Crown Prosecution Service seemingly instructed Cheshire Police not to involve Professor Hutton, and this work was cancelled. Professor Hutton has since become a strident critic of both the prosecution of Lucy Letby and the statistical evidence that was used in court. Number 26. Infants were much more unwell than presented in court. The prosecution, particularly the aforementioned Dr. Dowie Evans, presented infants in the court case as being very well and stable when they were, in fact, in many cases, highly vulnerable and very unwell. It is impossible to go over all of the information related to this point, but it can be summarised by saying that the expert panel of neonatologists assembled by Lucy's barrister Mark MacDonald and neonatal expert Professor Hugh Lee, who massively outranked anyone in the prosecution case, had a very different view on the physical state of these infants at the time of their collapse and death. Number 27. Professor Lee trashes the main diagnostic criterion. One of the major problems with the prosecution case is that it is reliant on an interpretation of discoloration and rashes which is based almost entirely on an academic paper authored by Professor Hugh Lee and Dr. Alan Tanswell. One of its authors, Professor Hugh Lee, has since come to the defence of Lucy Letby and has been highly critical of the medical evidence used in court, indicating that the paper he had co-authored has been completely misused. This means that several diagnoses used in court are effectively worthless. Number 28. Dr. Evans changed multiple diagnoses. Having been criticised by numerous neonatologists, Dr. Evans later changed his diagnoses for several infants in the court case. What makes this even more bizarre is that the Court of Appeal verdicts still lists his original theories. It is indeed generous to describe them as diagnoses for several of the infants in the case. Number 29. Dr. Evans cited the wrong type of air embolism. One of the many problems with the hypotheses of Dr. Evans is that he cited papers which examined the wrong type of air embolism, arterial as opposed to venous. Again, this renders his so-called diagnoses even more worthless than they were already. Number 30. The Child C debacle. The case of Child C has been mentioned earlier in this video, and even in the debacle of the Lucy Letby case, the court proceedings for Child C were particularly shambolic. Dr. Evans changed the date that he considered to be critical in the infant's condition at the 11th hour, literally in court. Having done this, Dr. Evans has engaged in all manner of absurd and embarrassing commentary since then, at first denying that he changed his diagnosis, then later giving a series of bizarre explanations. Most recently, Dr. Evans wrote to numerous newspapers indicating that he had noticed that the Crown Prosecution Service prosecution team and police had somehow mixed up the dates, and he corrected this in court. This is a categorical lie, as all of the court proceedings are available. Dr. Evans spent 4 hours in the witness box and never said anything remotely like this. In addition, there are all sorts of disclosure issues that would make this impossible, even if we didn't know it to be categorically untrue anyway. Number 31. The specious diagnosis of exclusion. Dr. Evans is a very strange character. On the one hand, he denied that his diagnoses were a diagnosis of exclusion, and then on the other hand, he has also stated explicitly that he used a diagnosis of exclusion. This leaves any commentator in a difficult position, but it is fair to say that Dr. Evans did use an exclusionary element in his diagnoses, as he cited this specifically. The problem is that Dr. Evans used the sudden collapse of the infants and the fact that resuscitation was unsuccessful as being diagnostic. This can only be described as utterly farcical, as the whole point of a diagnosis of exclusion is that all possibilities are excluded. There is no possible way that Dr. Evans can exclude all possibilities for the collapse of an infant based on the fact that the infant failed to respond to resuscitation and it was a sudden collapse. Furthermore, in many cases, Dr. Evans cited collapses as being sudden when medical evidence suggests otherwise. Number 32. Dr. J. Ram changes his story. The case of Child K was bad enough anyway, based on no real or meaningful evidence, but the fact that it has now been revealed that Dr. Ravi Jairam completely changed his story is critical, as this both indicates how unreliable his evidence in court was, and also contradicts the only piece of evidence used to secure this conviction. It is furthermore doubtful whether one of the primary accusers of Lucy Letby should be so centrally involved in the court case in an evidential capacity, particularly having also been involved in the police investigation. Number 33. The extraordinary case of Child E. In the case of Child E, all medical evidence points to collapse being caused by a massive gastrointestinal bleed. Indeed, this infant lost 25% at least of its blood supply. Claims made by Dr. Evans regarding a tool or implement being used to cause bleeding are specious to the point of being absurd. Number 34. The spurious insulin measurements. There were serious problems with the insulin cases that were used in court. Measurements were not conducted correctly in a forensic manner, while comments made by the laboratory that conducted initial testing, requiring follow-up testing in a laboratory in Guildford, were completely ignored by the Countess of Chester. Number 35. The impossible insulin logistics. There are also numerous problems with the logistics involved with the insulin cases. Firstly, Lucy Letby was accused of spiking feeding bags on the unit, but none of these bags were retained. This is an entirely hypothetical accusation. The logistics involved were essentially impossible, requiring Lucy to have extrasensory perception, and it is accepted by the prosecution that she didn't hang up these supposedly spiked bags. Again, it's important to emphasise that these bags were never retained or tested, so we don't even know if these supposedly suspicious bags were even actually suspicious, let alone did Lucy Letby handle them personally. There were also specific incorrect statements made in court with regard to the insulin measurements and problems with testing. There is also new insulin information available to Lucy's defence, which cannot be discussed in this video. Number 36. The meaningless handover sheets. The prosecution spent a long time in court talking about some handover sheets that were found in Lucy's home. There are numerous problems with this. Firstly, a multitude of healthcare professionals has indicated that it is common for nurses to take handover sheets home by mistake. Secondly, the implication was that Lucy had somehow treasured these documents, but they were all found either in a bin bag in her garage, waiting to be thrown away, or stuffed in a Morrison's carrier bag under her bed. There was also evidence that she treasured one handover sheet, but that was completely unrelated to the indictment. Indeed, the vast majority of handover sheets were nothing to do with the court case, and in fact this supposed item of evidence is completely unrelated to the allegations. Number 37. The Facebook searches that tell us nothing. A lot was also made in court of the fact that Lucy searched for parents of children on Facebook. It is firstly quite obvious that this could simply have been a natural interest in parents that she had struck up a personal relationship with and an example of genuine concern. However, it is also worth noting that Lucy searched for many people on Facebook, and the parents of infants or anyone related to the case was only 1% of these total searches. They therefore clearly had no significance to Lucy and frankly shouldn't have been included in the court case. Number 38. The supposed infatuation motive. It has been impossible for either the police or prosecution to put forward a feasible motive for the supposed crimes of Lucy Letby. This is significant because the acts don't really make any sense. They are not consistent with anything that we know about Lucy Letby. She doesn't benefit from them in any way. There is no evidence of any psychological deterioration. The best that the prosecution could do was attempt some rather feeble insinuation that she had become infatuated with a doctor and therefore harmed the infants in order to attract his attention. I don't think even the prosecution really believes this, as it is quite evident from text messages that Lucy already had his attention and the doctor was very likely to have been the instigator of this. Number 39. Trivial text messages. Indeed, numerous text messages were presented in court, and with regard to the so-called infatuation theory, there wasn't even one text message that reached the level of mild flirtation. Similarly, other text messages were absolutely trivial, perfectly ordinary communications that demonstrated nothing whatsoever. Number 40. The nonsense diary code. In their promotional film on Operation Hummingbird, Cheshire Police suggested that there is a code in Lucy's diary that was uncovered by analysts. This is palpable nonsense. There is very obviously not a code in Lucy's diary. The diary consists of entirely mundane information, and this was an accusation that is completely without foundation and frankly ludicrous. Number 41. Arcane arguments from the prosecution. There were all manner of arcane suggestions and inane lines of inquiry made by the prosecution during the court case. These are too numerous to mention in this video, but one particular highlight was when barrister Nick Johnson asked Lucy Letby if she could remember being born. A long discussion about whether or not Lucy Letby owned a shredder was another particular highlight, although the fact that she could have used the shredder to shred much of the supposed anecdotal evidence but did not seems to have been overlooked. Number 42. Pyjamagate becomes more farcical. Another farcical portion of the trial occurred when prosecutor Nick Johnson became fixated on whether or not Lucy Letby was wearing pyjamas. This was already a ludicrous line of inquiry because it is very evident that Lucy Letby was wearing nightwear when she was arrested. Furthermore, this is hardly an important detail of the account she gave regarding her harrowing experience of being arrested. However, ahead of the release of a new documentary from Netflix, it has also become clear that not only was Lucy clearly arrested in nightwear several times, but also that one arrest in particular was even more harrowing than the one described in court, with police bursting into her bedroom and arresting her while she was still in bed, a completely disproportionate example of police conduct. Number 43. Fabrication and lies from the prosecution. The prosecution engaged in fabrication and outright lying during the court case. Perhaps the most notable example was when barrister Nick Johnson suggested that the parents of Child E and Child F had caught Lucy Letby red-handed, whereas it is agreed evidence from both sides that this definitely did not happen. For some reason, the judge chose to allow this. There are countless fabrications from the prosecution throughout the court case with no evidential basis whatsoever. One of the obvious examples of this are assertions related to Lucy falsifying data records, none of which had any evidential support whatsoever. Number 44. Swipe card data reversed. Among the hodgepodge of nonsense that the prosecution used in court was a record of movements of nurses around the unit. This was based on swipe card data that was not intended to monitor the movement of staff in the first place, which was already flawed because there were entrances and exits from one of the nurseries which didn't require a swipe card. But Cheshire Police further compounded this by reversing the swipe card data for 9 infants in the court case. Number 45. Manipulative eyewitness testimony. There was a significant amount of eyewitness testimony in the court case, but it is hard to understand what this was intended to achieve other than illegitimately manipulate the jury. No eyewitnesses saw Lucy Letby do anything wrong. Similarly, large portions of the trial were also devoted to interviewing various staff from the Countess of Chester Hospital, again, none of whom had seen Lucy Letby do anything wrong. What these latter portions typically portrayed is that no one at the hospital knew what was going wrong. This is indeed quite evident, as this was an underskilled, underperforming and ultimately incompetent unit. Number 46. No defence witnesses. No defence witnesses were called for Lucy Letby. Not only were the medical witnesses available to Lucy not called, but nurses who were willing to speak in her favour as character witnesses were actively discouraged from doing so by the NHS. Number 47. Expert panel conclusions. The panel of neonatal experts assembled by Professor Hsu Lee and Barrister Mark MacDonald concluded that there was no medical evidence to support malfeasance. The death or injury of affected infants were due to natural causes or errors in medical care, and there were numerous problems on the unit with the conducting of medical procedures, as well as teamwork and interdisciplinary collaboration. It should be emphasised that this team of experts is crammed full of people who were at the absolute pinnacle of neonatology. There was no one even close to this level involved with the prosecution. Number 48. Close the hospital down. Speaking at a press conference in February 2025, Professor Hsu Lee, one of the most important figures in the history of neonatology in Canada, opined that if the Countess of Chester was a hospital in Canada, it would be closed due to its poor standards and sanitary conditions. It is this which is an underlying reason for the collapses and deaths on the neonatal unit at the Countess of Chester, not the supposed conduct of Lucy Letby. Number 49. £60 billion NHS and maternity scandal. Problems at the Countess of Chester are emblematic of systemic issues in the National Health Service. Recent reporting pointed to £60 billion of medical negligence liabilities, with this figure having surged due to a rise in maternity payouts. A maternity crisis in the NHS has been well documented, and the spike in deaths at the Countess of Chester was symptomatic of this overall malaise. Number 50. Hundreds of experts. Hundreds of other experts have come forward to express their concern about the conviction of Lucy Letby. I have interviewed over 60 experts for my book, which will be released in June or July of this year, and I could easily rewrite the book with 60 different experts. In fact, I could have a pretty good crack at writing a third book with another 60 experts that I've been in contact with. Furthermore, this doesn't even include the 31 experts that are part of Mark MacDonald's panel. There have been literally hundreds of doctors, professors, statisticians, nurses, and other experts who have pointed out the egregious flaws in the prosecution of Lucy Letby. It has become absolutely evident that this is an unsafe conviction and that Lucy Letby is innocent. If you would like to know more details about the Lucy Letby case, then the 4 videos on the screen now are a good place to start, as they go into further details about many of the topics discussed in this video. These videos are namely Lucy Letby BBC Panorama, the 200 Problems You Didn't Hear, the Lucy Letby Jury Never Heard These 40 Critical Things, 20 Ways the Lucy Letby Debacle Could Have Been Stopped, and Can You Explain Why the Conviction of Lucy Letby is Fundamentally Flawed in Less Than 15 Minutes. If you have any queries or comments regarding the content of this video, please leave them in the comments section. Thank you for watching.